This is a show for grown-ups.
And they say bad words.
And they say bad words.
Say final warning.
Final warning.
Hello and welcome to the Pot of Blunders. I am your host, Nate Magnuski, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Richard Sullivan.
That's me.
Also, Eric's in the middle of a drink, so I'm going to say his name right now.
Hello.
Zach's here.
I was going to interrupt you. Hi, I'm Conan Librarian.
You're Zach now.
I'm Zach now.
You get a real boy name now.
I get it, because it's behind the scenes. It's Pot of Blunders After Dark.
That's right. Yeah, these are the deep cuts, baby. Richard, stop farting. It's on the mic.
At least you can't smell it through the podcast.
Thank God technology has not advanced that far. Speaking of farts, what are we doing tonight there, Conan?
We are going to talk about the one-shot that I ran that we played, the Spelljammer one-shot. I'm pretty excited to share a little bit behind what I was going for and some of my thoughts just around Spelljammer itself.
Was there anything you felt worked like particularly well that you're really proud of in that game, or stuff that you thought would pan out just didn't?
You know, toward the end it got a little goofy. Just, you can always throw the word space in front of anything and say it's some space bullshit or Spelljammer bullshit, but it's easy to build what feels like a bigger world. So the city of Brawl, this floating city out on the Astral Sea, it has a lot already built around it. So it feels whole and it feels big and like there's more out there. Anytime you play in a setting where you mention other things or there's these other possibilities, even if you spend however much time in one location, you can build this other world around it. That just felt really good. And I feel like as we played, while yes, we were on one track, we had a mission to do, we were in a one shot, I still felt like there was a place to go. If you guys had said, we're going to bugger off and do this thing, there's space for that. Pun intended. Yeah. So I think that worked very well, not just the scope of the world itself, but also I feel like it felt Spelljammery, it felt spacey, it felt fantasy space. As far as what didn't work, now, can I go into spoilers? This is after the second episode. Yeah.
Our millions and millions of fans have already listened to it a couple times over at this point.
The end, the getting to the final scene, right, where you're piloting this ship, I really should have raised the DCs. I had a whole chart for rolling on for events and encounters and things that could have happened to make that more dynamic than just, oh, you rolled well, and that was it. I feel like there was a lot of meat and potatoes in the game itself, but when it got to that, it was just kind of one roll, and then it ended. But that was just me. I wish that it felt more dynamic, but I don't know how you guys felt about that.
We can't help that we're rolling studs.
Yes. That's true. You guys were crushing it.
I mean, I think at that point in the night, that was the best thing you could have possibly done.
Which just streamlined it like, yep, like, you got it.
We're going to get to that dead lady, and that's going to be it, because y'all are trouble. Richard, what do you think? Like, what was your favorite part of the game?
Oh, the sex. The hot, liquidy sex with Eric.
Obviously.
Let's dive into that a little, actually. Diamond, because you were a liquid guy.
Yeah.
Nice.
How would it work, and how aroused was I? Is that what you want to know?
Yeah, I want to know the gritty details.
Well, I think if somebody can turn their whole body into liquid...
I didn't really want the gritty details. I'm sorry immediately for saying that.
I mean, Eric, you know, you were a willing participant.
Yes.
How do you imagine sex with a water person?
Okay.
I feel like for clarification, my character was not a water person. They were kind of an amoeba shape-shifting thing.
Like a
so really,
person.
they could have been anything that you needed them to be, which is probably what made that very attractive to your giant elephant fighter character.
I'm not an elephant. I'm actually a hippopotamus. See, how does it feel? How does it feel?
Christ. So, what I will say on my end, you know, I haven't heard what it sounds like yet.
It's so erotic.
Not
sounds like that.
I think so. But so the scene itself, I don't have a problem with sexual content. I don't have a problem with two willing players engaging in what they want to engage in. One, for me, it's been a long time since I actually sat down at a table with players that are comfortable with getting into it, into each other, into the character, into goo, into.
I mean, we kept it pretty classy though.
No, and that's you did.
No.
But that being said,
no.
so for me as GM trying to accomplish, we're doing this space thing. I do, and I said it before a little bit, but I kind of wish I'd let that play a little bit more because you two know each other. And while it was also hilarious, for me, I usually, all right, we have our fun, we fade to black, we get on with the mission. But I do think that there was something there that could have been a little more like, all right, where do you guys go with this? It's been a long time since I've been at a table with players who are comfortable going to that place, whether it's going to the tub and having slimy hippo sex or whatever it is. Usually innuendos, someone goes to a bedroom with someone else and fade to black.
In Eric's endo.
There you go. So I didn't know if this was going to be one 20-minute long slimy hippo dick joke or if this was going to be something worth getting into, especially given these are new races, we're in a new setting. And while I've heard a lot of fantasy smut, I regret not letting... I'm just going to come out and say, I regret not letting goo person hippo space sex happen.
So you're uncomfortable with the interracial aspect?
No.
What you just said.
If it was hippo on hippo, you'd let it go. That's what you said. Get it
No,
on video.
what I'm saying is that I didn't know where it was going and if it was going to be just one long joke or if it was just going to be a complete derail, because also it's a one-shot. If it were a campaign, I'll write a whole side story for you guys to tub fuck. That's fine. But we were...
Love that song.
You can have performance checks every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
5 minutes,
Constitution
goddamn.
savings throws.
Yeah, craft lovemaking is required for most of my games. It was more about trying to just move along with the story as opposed to just letting something fun happen, which, to that point, it really depends on the table, because there are plenty of tables where, yeah, this was totally fine, and I was kind of the asshole for trying to move it on a clock, whereas there are a lot of tables where even a fart joke is out of line. You know what I mean? So I didn't know where it was going to go, and I wanted to keep moving forward instead of just letting a fun moment happen. So that's on me.
Well, and I think I've been talking with Nate earlier this week about running games and like safety precautions you can put in place of like what are the boundaries. As a group, we hadn't had that conversation about like where are people okay with things, what does that look like, where are the spots where like if we cross this line we've gone too far, kind of scale it back, and even while we're recording, if like we say something, you can easily be like pause, wait, let's not go down that route. Richard will work his edit magic. It never happened to the population, but like you're also trying to make sure you're taking care of the people that are playing around like the Zoom table, we'll call it.
Right.
But that wasn't a conversation we'd had to say like I'm comfortable with kind of this moment happening. And like as a player, I do want you to rein me back a little bit when we go too far.
Right.
Like, okay, now you're talking about the anatomy of the insertion of the amoeba into the hippo, and so we're going to stop talking because that's 3 yards too far.
It's the difference between like a tasteful sex scene in like a regular movie or porno.
Yes.
And see, I didn't really get pornographic with it because, in my opinion, it was actually basically a direct rip from Prometheus when Idris Elba says to Vickers, he goes, "Are you a robot? No, prove it." And then they go, "Fuck." But it was like a character moment. If I think I'm about potentially to die, maybe I do something I wouldn't normally do. I find something, in that way. I thought it was...
wouldn't have done me on a normal occasion?
No, not unless I thought I was going to die.
I have very few boundaries when it comes to game for most things. I really do. So it wasn't I'm uncomfortable with this as much as that type of scene. Where does it really land in the game or the session? And yeah, I set up, you may be going to die. What do you do? And you guys were like, we're going to do this thing. I was like, oh, well, but I want to shoot bad guys. And it was lame.
I think you handled it perfectly well, especially given that like Richard and I fairly well.
Yeah.
Eric, okay, but it's really just like a passing acquaintance and whatnot. Like you don't know if he was like, I don't want my character to have sex with Richard's character. And maybe like Eric was wicked uncomfortable. Maybe I, as a third party, was just like, this is grossing me out.
But Eric, to be fair,
I did initiate. I did provide.
He did. He was like, "Don't threaten me with a good time."
Yeah.
So I was the one who was like, oh shit, he's gonna let me do this? Because I didn't think he would. No, but you talk about the decision. I thought, oh no, I'm not gonna go down that. But he kept teasing me, and I was like, oh shit, maybe he does want to do this.
Nice.
But if he was like, no, that's gross, step off, I'd have to respect that, you know.
And that's, I think, as silly as all of this kind of got, it is kind of a good point that a lot of people miss why there are precautions at the table. And you're right, Eric, to your point, we didn't have the lines conversation, the veils and the safety stuff, but also at no point would I have said, you know, I'm not really going to be comfortable with you inserting yourself in him. You have to be, as a GM, able to move through a scene while giving room for the scene to breathe and the players to do what they want to do. Now, by the end of it, it was still fun. I didn't feel like anything necessarily was lost. And I don't know what ends up in the episode. I'm excited to hear it. But I think it was almost a good thought exercise for other people running tables where it's like, all right, well, this is the focus and the point of this one shot. And then this other thing's happening. How do you roll with it?
I think it's a great lesson. Yeah.
So we were kind of needling you a little bit about it too.
Right.
You know.
Right. I'm making it sound very interesting and very retrospective, but also like, well, how does the amoeba go in the hippo? Like, there was also that sentence.
Pseudopods. All pseudopods. Like in all those cartoons I watch.
So yeah, that's where I landed on that.
But I will also say I think something that's probably important to note is like, as like the singular queer player at the table, at least as far as I'm aware, not making assumptions about everyone around the table, but I think that sometimes is a moment where, as a queer player at a table, you don't always know where your lines are because, you know, I didn't know how Richard was portraying that character. I mean, my characters are always kind of a little bit like, I'll fuck whatever, it's fine. But you never know, like as a queer person, you never fully know kind of if I push this line a little bit. There's a difference depending on the table you're playing at between someone pushing a straight moment between a male and a female character and somebody pushing a moment that is under a queer umbrella. And I think why I trusted this group that I could do that in that space. There's definitely other tables or other games where that same thing is not there. So I think, you know, like, while we're having that moment as well, I think there's something to be said for the fact that, like, when Richard did tease it a little bit, I was like, oh, we can do, like, we can have like a fun thing happen that like you don't always get in what I will call a mixed crowd. Because most of my D&D and tabletop gaming kind of settings and adventures that I'm like either play in or DM for are almost all exclusively queer people for the most part. And so having that play out with a different demographic group, I think there's something to be said for that space where that was something that could happen. And I felt comfortable to be like, yeah, like, let's keep going. Let's see where this leads. Because again, like, it's not a moment you always get at tables. As one who has sat at many a tables at PAXes and other conventions, where you're barely confident that you can identify your person, like you as a person, as being gay, let alone a character you're playing, let alone do anything semi-naughty with anyone around the table, because people are awful.
Yeah, you don't know how you'll be perceived, treated, played with, played against, however it might be. And
right.
So for me personally, I've not GM'd for a lot of people that identify as queer, and those that I have, it hasn't come to that point. Some of that has come up. Like I said, usually it's a fade to black. So on my end, as someone who identifies as straight, there is a challenge for me to also make sure I can include this, but I don't take it so far that it comes off as comical. I think it's easy for straight people to make gay jokes, to kind of put it bluntly. And that's where I was at, I didn't want it to just sound like a gay joke. You know what I mean? And that's where I was wanting us to stay away from that, as opposed to do a thing and then move on.
Right.
Eric, I was really appreciative you let me play with you. And like, I don't mean that to be funny. That. No, but I don't mean that to be funny. I appreciate,
yeah.
Because it was just very it's awful. I feel like we connected in that because it wasn't played for laughs. You know what I mean? It was sincere, and you felt comfortable enough to do that with me. So I really think we took.
You're turning so fucking red.
Because I do mean it. I think our friendship took. I think we understand each other a little bit more now.
Yeah, what are we? Is what he's trying to say.
Shut up.
Listen,
I don't really like labels so much. I just want to keep this kind of casual.
This is legitimately the most human and personal I've ever heard Richard
I hate
be,
it.
and it's
Listen,
It's making me so uncomfortable. Not that he's having this conversation with you, just that he's showing emotion that it's real and there's no like band of humor around it, and it's sickening to me. I don't know how to handle this. Amazing space sex scenes aside, what is it about Spelljammer that like really like, yes, this is happening. I want to do this.
so.
Wait, Spelljammer or the sex?
I know what made him want to do the sex scene.
I don't know, like when for Spelljammer is like a setting though, like when I saw it pop up on the like D&D Beyond stuff is like this is rolling out whatever. I don't know, like it was just I think there's something fun about like wizards in space being able to do, and I think if this was a longer campaign, I'd probably take more time with my characters to figure out how could my spells look differently in a space setting. Like might they feel different, might they look different? Was kind of all that actually turn into? You gave me could get more complicated with like deities and all of that. If you're like, we're now dealing with an entire universe instead of like our little planet. But it was something that's fun about that idea, like being able to be on a spaceship, have to figure out gravity and like how. I mean, at the very beginning, I literally thought at one point that I had killed all of you by just bouncing off the ship and hitting the thrusters. But like, that's a fun thing in that setting that like isn't something you get in like your standard traditional like D&D. Like, could I still do something that my party will die because of my actions? Absolutely. Do I have to worry about gravity and spaceships and all of that? Like, no. And that was fun.
Traditional fantasy can be so, I mean, it's usually funny with D&D and whatnot, but it can be so serious and heavy at times. Spelljammer is in its essence gonzo. And it lends itself to the most ridiculously over-the-top, stupid, cinematic bullshit. It's like He-Man meets Time Bandits. It's awful. It's great. I love the setting so much. There's so much stupid shit you can do.
I got a big like Pirates of the Caribbean and space vibe.
Yeah. Except there's dragons and elves.
Spelljammer has been influential to no small degree in my tabletop life. So one of the first long campaigns I played in was a Spelljammer campaign and a Planeswalker campaign. I ran like a 7-year 4th edition game that had a lot of Astral Sea and Spelljammer. Some of my favorite settings, characters, anything happened because of Spelljammer. I originally, before I got into fantasy, was a sci-fi kid. So Spelljammer has always had a really big place in my heart. And kind of like what all three of you had said, it's gonzo, it's different, it's new, it's silly, but also can do things that other settings cannot. And what's cool is you can take, say we're on the Astral Sea, and all right, we're going to go into this moat or this plane where we're just going to spend, a year of a campaign in one place doing this one thing, right? And then we decide we're done, or we beat the bad guy, or we're just bored with that. You get on a ship and you just you get on your ship and you literally just go do anything you want to do in any type of setting without having to give, I guess, continuity. As a DM, I love it because I can say, you know what? Now we're in space and now you're on a sewer world. And you know what? We're going to go through space. Now you're on a desert world. We're going to go through space. Like, it's the same reason that people really like Planewalker campaigns, is because it gives so much variety that otherwise you have to kind of shoehorn into a regular campaign. Whether it's, going sci-fi, going fantasy, you can do so much more with it.
Richard, I know you don't normally like straight up fantasy stuff. Like you've been on the show a few times saying that, like, it's just not your cup of tea.
That's not my thing.
Yeah. Did you feel more comfortable or more like excited to play this?
Yeah, I think I did. I think I identify with the genre a little more than like sword and sandals type of shit. Because to me, this is like swashbuckling, Red Dwarf kind of sci-fi stuff. And if you just add space in front of anything goes.
Yes, but there was like a 5-minute period in episode 2 that
I was like, if I get lost,
space in front of
just space cannon, space gun, space wizard.
And that was mostly just to needle you, Richard. But here's a table hack for all you GMs out there. If you're not sure where you're going with it, just put space in front of it, and it works. Your players will add sci-fi sounds, and suddenly there's like a Darth Vader panel on the dude they're talking to because you called him Space Brian instead of just Brian. Like, yeah, it's cheesy, but it does work because also, as cheesy as this sounds for me when I say, because it's space gerbils, space hamsters, it does in fact do something more for you when you're saying, all right, instead of just a mind flayer, right? What does a mind flayer look like in space? The book has some very cool information about mind flayer ships, but then when I was planning what we're going to do, to me, I'm also wondering, what does a mind flayer look like in space, and what kind of thing do they occupy? What kind of, not just literal space, but what kind of mind space and what kind of theater space, right? Because a mind flayer in any other game is a super hard bad guy who's usually underground and will eat your brains. But you guys weren't in a cave. You guys weren't going after an elder brain. You were in a space field full of mind flayer ships. So what does that look like where it's still scary, right? So when you say space mind flayer, how do you have the same impact? And that's where even just the super cheesy exercise of throwing out space hamster, space mind flayer, space sex, you throw that out and you have to adapt it to what's going to fit that setting. Because like Richard said, sword and sandal shit does not fly if you do want to make it fit a more sci-fi or fantastical setting.
Do you think it's harder as a DM to pitch that setting to an audience versus like just saying, oh, we're going to do regular ass D&D, because there's more of a cultural basis for that kind of stuff?
I think yes and no. I think yes, because some people don't want Spelljammer. Some people don't want that type of setting. But I think yes, because a lot of people are hungry for something different and new. Spelljammer, there's no rule saying you can't put your fantasy game in space. There's no rule saying you can't literally, and 4th edition, you could sail the astral sea. It had information. Like I said, I ran a huge campaign, a long campaign set in the astral sea, which was essentially a spelljamming campaign. But when people see Spelljammer, it's, quote, an old system. It's this old module. It's this old content. So when you throw out, we're going to do what you like, but do something new with it, I don't think it really matters if you're playing D&D and you say that. I think any tabletop that people are used to, that you can put a new twist on, makes it more appetizing. I don't think it's a hard sell. I think the hard sell comes with the other unfortunate caveats that a system like this new Spelljammer has. I don't think anyone's opposed to new content or a fresh take. I think it's hang-ups that are introduced or not eliminated when the content is introduced.
So let's talk about the 600-pound gorilla in the room. Is it too on the nose?
I was going to say the 60-pound monkey in the room.
Doesn't seem like that big of a monkey.
They're 50. What are they? Why don't you introduce us? Because
Eric's favorite character race, and we had to really argue against this. They wouldn't play it.
Jesus.
The Hadozee. I think anyone who's got even like an inkling of what's happening in the hobby knows that Wizards fucking stepped in it big time with how they reintroduced the Hadozee.
And by reintroduced, you mean didn't change any of their actual backstory, and just plopped in some racist stuff. And then like a couple weeks after people were like, hey, that's really racist, they were like, it's cool, everybody. We can just remove it from our from our digital content, and now no one knows that it was racist anymore. Our bad.
All right, we got to actually talk about what these things are, because maybe not everyone knows. So the Hadozee are basically like flying squirrel monkey people, and Eric's going to give you their full history. Take it away, Eric.
Well, like their backstory is like they were enslaved. It's an enslaved race, and the wizard who had enslaved them was doing these experiments and whatnot on them and caused them pain, which then amplified their power, that amplified their kind of abilities. And so it was through the trauma they grew and were stronger, and then broke free. So it's all it gets racist tropes in general. They're monkey people.
It's better / worse because someone saw that they were suffering and wanted them to have better, so they were given a magic serum to elevate them further, to have their own consciousness and to quote rise above what they were through the salvation of these people giving them and let's just name that one. It's literally white saviors. White saviors came in and freed the stand-in for black people race, which is all of that is racist. Everything is terrible. And the hard part that I struggle with is Wizards being we have sensitivity readers, we have all these other people in the room, we're doing such great work with diversity and yada yada. And stuff I was seeing online as all this unfolding is people were I know that they have people at the table, they're actively not listening to those people, and when people do speak up, they're it's not a great response.
Like, no one likes being told, hey, your stuff's a little bit racist. They're like, no, this is totally not racist. I know what you're talking about. It's fine.
Well, if they just before this, they released the Radiant Citadel, which is a book based around cultural minority stories and folklore and all of these really cool alternate culture things that has so much history and so much richness built into it. You have these people writing this amazing content and all these collaborators and creators, and then you have the guys in the next room who are like, hey, you know what I loved? Spelljammer. Fucking let's copy paste it, ship it, done. Like, they couldn't have just walked it over to the next room where they're like, hey, are you guys the Radiant Citadel guys? Check this out. What do you think? Like, just one person to have checked that. And I mean, I'll be honest, I was really excited about Spelljammer, and I pre-ordered it. I got it. I was super excited. I went through, I read the stats on the Hadozee. I was like, not really for me. I'm not going to include it in anything. And it wasn't until it had been out a week or two that I saw the first thing about it, went back through, and just kind of, it blew my mind to see something so, blatantly horrible and ridiculous left in this book, not just because it's obviously racist, but just how lazy any part of that process is, from the story itself to the handling to what Wizards did with the content. Like, how did it pass through so many people, and why is it afterwards that they sent out an apology letter and took it offline? All it took was one guy like saying, hey, did anyone else read this?
I think the rough part too is one that they do. I mean, they absolutely have sensitivity readers on staff. Like, they absolutely do. Like, that's the thing that came up a while ago with stuff, and like other things that they've gone back and fixed. Like, they absolutely have those people in the room, which means, again, those people were not listened to. Like, the people that they pay to pick up those things were not actively listened to. But then also too, now when you go back and look at the backstory of the Hadozee, they've literally just scrubbed it. Like, it's not even that they did anything interesting with them or gave them something like rich and engaging and like making you want to play this character race. They literally just stripped all of it out, and they're like, yeah, they're just, they're monkey people that can fly sometimes for reasons that no one knows.
They are blatantly not racist, but they're blatantly bland and boring and just a broken gliding squirrel. Like, yeah, they scrubbed it so hard that unless you're just wanting to be a broken movement character, why would you care about them at this point?
I think they changed the movement too. They were like, sorry about the racism, we will just erase that stuff, but we will fix the other stuff that's broken mechanically. And it's like, can you just do it both? Can you just fix it all?
All I can think of right now is the community meme where it's like, I can forgive the racism, but the movement brokenness, I will not stand for.
You can forgive the racism? I love that meme. I expect like the biggest publisher in the industry that's got the lion's share of all the money that's coming in and out of TTRPGs to do better. And I'm like constantly disappointed in it. And like you said, they do have the sensitivity readers, but what's the value of them besides just like, I hate to use this phrase, but like a token sensitivity reader that you're not actually going to fucking use? Like, you're paying them for what? Just to have someone in the room be like, well, they exist, so we're totally covered.
And that's where I think Pot of Blunders is an indie podcast. And I know you guys have played some D&D. I was excited to be asked to run this and to have this. A lot of people really don't like D&D, and there are 1,000 reasons to not like D&D. As someone who really enjoys D&D, I wish more people did enjoy it. And then something like this happens. It's like, yeah, I get it. Yep. You can't, there is no good defense, and there isn't, absolutely. And you shouldn't try to defend such a stupid thing. I guess I could go on and on as to why this was really bitter, because makes me bitter is because, again, like I said, Spelljammer is a huge thing for me, and I'm excited they're going to be doing more content along these lines. They're going to be doing Astral Sea content, things like that further down the line, but it's pretty bittersweet when they've already botched this so bad like that.
No, I think, Conan, you're the only one that owns the books. I think, Eric, you have access to them through D&D Beyond.
I have access
right?
through D&D Beyond because I'm in a campaign that somebody's content sharing and like has everything.
Did you read the starting adventure, either of you, that's provided in the books?
No.
I cannot do prefab adventures. I cannot run them. It's something in my brain where I literally cannot run, so I'll skim it to see if there's like a cool stat block or a blurb, but I can't. So no, I did not.
You
Long
did not
answer.
You didn't miss out at all. So imagine you're creating a setting book that's meant to sell the magic and mystery of your fucking campaign setting, right? Now imagine that the adventure you write, the first adventure that anyone will have access to, there's no reason to play one of the races that you provided in the book. The adventure is specifically for existing characters to be swept away into the space adventure. It's just like, what a stupid move.
So that is where, I mean, and we see this a lot. Wizards moving into 5th edition, they don't really do settings as much as they do modules anymore. Prefabricated stories and campaign books, as opposed to, and I'm going to say it again because I always say it, a system like 4th edition that has so much world building and splat content. 5th edition isn't about splat content and self creation. So if you want to do that, you really have to kind of piece apart the things that they put out. So it's not entirely surprising that they would introduce cool stuff, but really it's, all right, we'll level all your characters. Well, now they're going to be in Spelljammer for the next 5 levels, and then move on to the next whatever published adventure they put out.
I didn't like the fact that this book was in 3 different pieces. You get each little tiny, it's what do they call it? It's like a box set of 3 little paperbacks.
I'm going to say, as the guy who does own it, I fucking love it, actually.
You stink.
I like books, so it's cool to have 3 different spines. That's fair.
We got him to say, boot his ass for the meeting.
Oh.
We don't cotton the nerds around here.
I like having the 3 different books because also I more than likely will use the monster book in another thing I'm doing. I like the adventure. I like it. I wish it had more content. And I think, again, they're going to be doing something, I think it's next year, that will, I think, complete what a lot of people has said is missing here. I like that it's split up. I like having the books. I like having more books. I like that it came with a map. And also because I think it's because the new movie is coming out, like all of Wizard's stuff is on super sale. Also because they're probably trying to apologize for being just absolute klutzes. All their stuff is on sale. So instead of full price, I paid almost just half price. So that didn't hurt at all.
I just look at a book like Eberron, Rising from the Last War. It's this massive book. It's got everything you'd ever need to run an adventure in Eberron. And then I look at these little dinky Spelljammer books, and I'm like, this is just a clever way to give us less content for the same price.
They're like 35, 45 pages. So yeah, you're only getting about 150 pages all in all, which is not amazing.
And the MSRP on that is like $50, right? Originally, if you pay full price for it.
But with the map it comes with and the other stuff in it, it's a cool box set. I will say that. I'm not going to apologize for liking stuff because that's my nerd thing. They do a good job of making it cool stuff.
All right, as a guy that's not hip to this stuff as much, it seems to me, I mean, everybody, like, you could have asked my mother what's D&D, and she would have heard of it, right? Spelljammer, you got to be, it seems very niche, right? Sales-wise, the money's in D&D. So is it just that because it's not a big, profit driver for them that they just don't put in the effort? Is that what it comes down to?
They were teasing Spelljammer for so many years. Whenever they put a little survey out and were like, what do you want to see out of D&D? Everyone was like, motherfucking Spelljammer.
Yep.
Now, the theory is that was like a Morbius goof from the fans, like asking for like when people were like, oh, but it said it's Morbin time and they re-released it. And they were like, you're a fucking idiot, Sony. Some people think it might have been a prank on the good old people at Wizards. I don't know.
I think it, as much as Wizards is a business, they're going to sell content that sells, and they're not going to apologize for that. I think Spelljammer, you're right, doesn't have the same treatment. I could go on and on about the amount of stuff that's not in this.
Right, it's not getting a Chris Pine movie this summer.
Right, exactly. Like you said, it is not core, it is niche, and it's for people like me who loved what it used to be, or people who say, I really want this new thing. It's not the guys who are just running through a campaign and playing, and they're not going to pull the gifts, they're not going to pull the same creatures, they're not going to pull the same adventures. It's why the adventure that's there is not built around, here's how you start a campaign. It's built around, hey, if your characters have been doing the same thing for a while and you're level 10, why don't you go do this adventure, spend $50 on a box set, and then go back to your campaign.
So take that, Richard.
I mean, what I'm saying is you're not wrong, and I wish you were.
It just seems to, even though if fans say they want it, they don't know what's best for them. Like when you give somebody what they ask for, it never really goes well.
It would go better if they gave everything that people were asking for from Spelljammer. Actual content on navigating the astral sea, actual planes, actual better ship-to-ship combat. I know that's a hot take because there's a lot of conversation about that out there. There's a lot of cool stuff in this book, but not enough. To me personally, I could run Spelljammer out of these books without having my old books. If you were new to Spelljammer, you would have a hard time creating just Spelljammer out of just these books. It would feel, I think, by scope, very limited compared to coming from someone who can run a whole campaign in Faerun because it's classic sword and sandal.
Right, but I guess what I'm asking is it worth it for them to create content for this?
Okay.
I guess that's my thing. They're kind of doing it because somebody said they might want it, but they're not putting, their A-team on it.
Right.
Because, has there been, a Hadozee level event in mainline D&D?
Oh, yeah. The drow exists.
Yeah.
Oh, was those the orcs, the black orcs?
The black elves.
Elves,
Yes.
okay. Which dark elves are a thing.
But they say, they turned black because they were evil, and the black skin is a symbol of their evil taint. And it's that's despicable. How do you do that?
I don't know.
There
It's
is
fucking wrong. You can't be how you tell they're evil? Because they're black. That's gross, man.
I just love that Richard moderately disagreed with us, and then his camera has now frozen.
The internet smote him down.
The Zoom has said.
That's what you get.
We don't need to go back and argue about drow and everything because they've retconned all of that to try and make it better. I think a lot of it just boils down to how are you explaining a race of people? And when you say an entire race of people are just inherently evil because they're evil and now they are all dark skinned because of that, as well as contextually when that was created, the timing of when that would have been in our own just American history, the parallels are not great. And that just kind of continues to build. And it's one of those things that I think, depending on how you approach playing and approach it, what identities and perspectives you bring to the table, it cannot feel that bad to you. Because this, I can rationalize it. But then if you're bringing certain identities that fall in alignment with certain things, I am a person, if you are a person of color and are reading how this dark-skinned race is just inherently evil, that may not feel good to you. And so I think there are, they try and take the steps to adjust, but there is a lot of that I think when you go back and read old fantasy or read, you go back and look at anything from classic whatnot fantasy and adventure eras, you always pick up on things this is just not, some of this is not good.
Yeah.
I've tried to go back and read stuff that I read when I was in high school that was my gateway into fantasy. And I was just this is not good anymore. My brain can no longer allow you to just say all these I won't name the books, but there's a set that I really loved when I was younger that when I was reading it now, literally everything is they're such and such race. Well, they're obviously cheap and they're obviously this. Everyone had a very prescribed set of traits and flaws that they just they weren't people. They were just you're from such and such, then that means these set things about you.
Man, I don't remember the Bernstein Bears being like that.
They were so rich. But and we hit on a little bit ago, but the fantasy sci-fi kind of mix for me, it was Star Wars was my big thing when I was a kid. That was probably one of the biggest things that got me into sci-fi and fantasy in any kind of setting. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that it was a two genre thing that had kind of come together. I always find that fun when you can take the I'm in space, but I can use telekinesis. I can, do these things. And it's fun to see now we're getting what feels like a huge resurgence of Star Wars and that genre of content right now with the 75 different TV shows that Disney Plus and Star Wars are just churning out over the next year or two. But that's been fun to have. And I think something like Spelljammer, it is nice because it can kind of give you that layering a little bit. Even if the campaign books don't give you enough to do a full campaign, if you've never really done Spelljammer stuff, being able to weave in some of that into a fantasy setting is fun. Some of my favorite campaigns I've done outside of D&D have been ones that were very genre blending, where you took people who were very fantasy based and threw them into a high tech scenario and watched them try and figure out how they were going to be.
So it seems like Spelljammer is Star Wars and straight D&D is Star Trek.
No.
Not at all. What are you
No,
talking
No,
just
I
like
get. So I get what you're. No,
like
I get.
I
what
don't say
you're
Star
saying.
Trek is
Here
boring because I love Star Trek, but like that straight procedural,
right.
episode of the week. Everybody has their set roles, military based. Whereas Star
I'm
Wars
still not with you.
has the punky rebel, and
Nah,
Star Trek is the equivalent to base D&D, whereas Star Wars is that blend. Star Wars has the folk story of the Jedi. Star Wars has the sci-fi along with that fantasy, whereas Star Trek is just classic sci-fi. The same way that they run D&D is just straight D&D, whereas Spelljammer has that additional blend.
see,
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
We're both high on pot news. Eric and I are going to be over here. I think I know what you're trying to get at, and that's not how I was thinking of what you meant.
I already
first.
solved it. Move on, Nate.
Yeah.
No, because it broke my brain like real bad for a second there. And I was
Because
like,
I think both you and I went to like he said Star Trek is like D&D, and I was like, no, one's sci-fi and one's fantasy. Fuck off.
yeah, like no,
Like,
it's like
those are
Game of
separate
Thrones.
things.
Yeah,
No, but the level of
a straightforward like sticks to that genre.
right.
Yes.
Yeah. Now I understand, and you're not too wrong.
Okay, I'll
Just
take
wrong
it.
enough. I think like the whole like, oh, they didn't have their A squad working on this, that's why it was a misstep. I think they need to put so much content out, because if they don't put like a book out every 3 months, say, they're going to give up part of their market share. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't think they really give a fuck about the quality of that content at this point. I think they give a fuck about having something for you to buy.
And they're big enough. Like a year from now, no one's going to be talking about this.
Probably not. They'll have some other fuck up thing, and then
Right.
they'll apologize for it, and then move on to the next fuck up. And like they're gonna release D&D or one D&D, whatever the new fucking
We
version
can't
is.
get into that. That's a
Or
whole other
that's-
thing.
No, but
Yeah.
they're big enough. They will survive. People are going to be
Yeah.
pissed off for a
Yeah.
time. We'll
Yeah.
get over it.
But like, this, if you don't like it, there's other fantasy games that are better out
And
there.
also also at the same time, like if D&D 5th edition is your thing and you love classic 5th edition D&D, and there's more than enough content that you can do pre-made campaigns. You have enough world building that you can run something in a campaign setting that you're familiar with, and there's plenty of stuff that like with all of, and especially with all of like the supplemental 5th edition things that other people do, where you can be like, oh, like I bought at PAX one year, I picked up Humblewood, which is like a 5th edition campaign setting supplemental, which is like you're basically playing like woodland creatures. Like you're a crow, or you're a like badger, or like in this campaign setting that is like everyone is some sort of sentient woodland creature that's built society. So I think you have enough that you can pull from that, like even if you're like, oh, this like one D&D or whatever they end up calling it is total bullshit and I hate it, you have plenty that you can still pull from.
Right.
And you can even side into like indie stuff, because indie creators are making supplemental things for D&D to make it interesting.
It's been around, just about 50 years now? It was like 70...
74-ish.
Yeah, so we're coming over 50 years. Like, there's plenty of shit that happens in Batman comics that I'm like, that's fucked. Just because it's one writer's interpretation of a character in a world that's been around that long,
Right.
I can say, well, that kind of sucks, but I can pick and choose what I read. Same with D&D, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, no one's gonna come into your home and take your books,
Right.
Like if you like 4th edition, like Zach and I do, because we're men of culture, like we can just play that. I mean, it will take us half an hour to go through our little tiny cards that take up 3/4 of the table as we search for the right power to use. Of course it will, God damn it, and that's our right as Americans.
So it will only take 2 minutes to create a combat encounter, and that's it. And then it's done. And then you run it, and it takes 4 hours to beat one bad guy, but it only took 2 minutes to create the encounter.
I like the part where it puts all the burden on the player, and the DM just used to say, like, it's a cool dog over here, though. Anyway, my main point is 4th edition didn't have Hadozee, and it's better.
Actually, I was just looking at my D&D Beyond, and apparently someone who's content sharing with me has bought the journey through the Radiant Citadel. So now I can actually like take a look at some of the stuff that's in there. The weird thing about D&D Beyond is like if someone is content sharing with you, like I can't purchase it for myself because technically I own it. If at some point that person stops content sharing with me, then I would have to buy it. But right now, like I can't actually. It's weird. Like D&D Beyond is like, no, you will not give us your money right now. I would have liked to have supported these content creators because that's actually a cool thing that people did. And it seems like you did it well. And what's unfortunate is that it came out around the same time Spelljammer was released. And we all focused on the racist monkey trope that they had. And we didn't focus on really cool one, because like the book is like a bunch of one-shot adventures that you can thread, I think, a needle to do a campaign.
Yeah.
But it's also like 12 or 14 like singular modules that you can do for like a variety of levels. So you just want to like, yeah, Conan has it right there on camera for everyone to see.
It is an amazing book. Even like I said, my brain is broken and I don't do prefabs. The inspiration, the stories, the characters, I've read through all of it. I love it. And I will be trying to use some of this because the content is just awesome. And it's from alternative angles that you don't get in a lot of D&D content, not just the stories, but the type of content it is.
Did any of the stuff from our game come from that?
No, not that I. And if it did, call me out. You can at Pot of Blunders for me being a hack. It's their fault. We were going to do a thing, and I was like, man, Spelljammer's good. And they were like, hey, we're too lazy to do this thing. Why don't you come on and run a game? Just saying.
That's exactly what happened. I was like,
That's
want
the level of planning and dedication you get.
That's right. Seat of the pants.
We won't say the thing we were going to do, but it was way too involved.
Yeah, we'll do it one day.
I'll run that too, you cowards. Let's do it. Let's do it right now.
I have the adventure all written.
Here's my dice. Let's do it.
Right now.
This supposedly 1 hour chat, we're going to play for the next 3 hours. Let's do it.
I'm not saying no.
Did you guys figure out what was going on in the story? Did you guys... So what was the take that you had? What was going on?
It was Space Moana.
Space Moana. Okay. What were the mole people doing at the beginning?
Which people?
The
worm people?
The worm people, yeah. What were they doing?
They were no good, those guys. They were up to bad business.
I figured they were either like worshiping they were trying to, resurrect the fallen god for their own nefarious purposes.
I figured like they're rock creatures that eat rot, right? And the mind flayers eat brains. So I figured the mind flayers would like eat the god's brain and make an elder brain or some shit. And then the little maggoty dudes would eat the body and make god maggot.
And that's where I guess one of my regrets, I don't think I laid it out well enough.
I nailed
it. It was either I didn't lay it out well enough or you're just dumb. And I think it's because I didn't lay it out well enough. And
Has to be.
I'm a little yeah.
I wasn't drunk at all for most of that.
Well, and I will say on that though, like I think for having run one shots before, I think one of like the fun things, but also the struggle is like in my brain, I have this entire thing built out, and like when you're in the campaign, when you're playing the session, it might not connect for me. Like it might not connect because I don't have the full picture of like what all was going on. But like it's still fun, and like part of the fun is that like you don't have all the answers, which leaves it open. Because I think we finished, and we're like, well, we technically we can't do another session with it because
I killed you.
Spoilers.
Which is how I like to end most of my one shots.
We all died, but you could easily create new characters, plop us in that same world campaign setting, and be like piecing together some things like, oh, like this thing happened over here with these 3 heroes. Right. And now we can kind of start actually understanding the puzzle of like what happened, because that would actually be like a really cool introductory session for a D&D campaign. Like tell your player straight up, like, hey, have 2 characters. Your first one's for the intro. The second one is going to be your real one. Like I don't want you to like be super attached to the first one. Well, they might come back, whatever. You leave it in, ambiguous, like
make it vague.
Just 2 characters, and then when they die, have that then spurn on like an entire like arc for a campaign.
So when are we going to record those sessions?
I mean, we got guaranteed content once a month there, Rich. I don't know. Once I had to pass it up. Plus, we can finally talk more about the Hadozee.
Fine, I will be a Hadozee the next episode.
I am very scared.
He's gonna do like this Jar Jar Binks fucking accent, and they're gonna have to shut the whole goddamn studio down.
They were trying to turn one of their guys into an aspect of this goddess so they could access. That's why you guys were good once the thing exploded and you had the shards in you. That's what they were trying to do. That's why there were these gouged things once you got there. They were trying to turn one of their people into an aspect of her so they could like access what was going on there.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, we all said that's what I said.
Okay.
No, that is what I said.
Well,
more or
the
less.
problem with running a one shot is I tend to go big when it comes to story stuff because I want it to have impact, I want it to be cool. But I think, Eric, you like you said, it's hard to get a good scope, both small and large, in a one shot to make it both engaging and not too big.
Pretty sure I'm right.
I didn't, like most times, care to listen to what you said, so I'm not sure what it was.
Let's just assume I'm right.
Okay.
Richard,
I don't know. Usually it's on Discord, so I can just, as I usually do, delete what you've typed and move on.
That's smart. Richard, in post, make him say the thing I said. Hey, gentlemen, what's your favorite part or piece, item? Piece, I think. What's your favorite piece of science fantasy media? Starting with Conan.
I have 3.
I want 1. Now, go ahead. We got another half an hour to take up.
Star Trek, Akira, and Ender's Game.
Those all seem like sci-fi.
That's what I
Yes.
said.
You said science fantasy.
Science fantasy.
You really don't goddamn listen to a word I say.
No, I think that Heather Locklear
shit,
did nail
Conan.
the role, and I don't know. Science fantasy is tough. It's easy to throw out. Star Wars would be one of the easier ones. So I'll say Star Wars because I obviously didn't understand the assignment.
Okay,
No,
but
you know what? Fuck you.
bring it tighter.
Akira, Star Trek, and the third one I said.
No, Star Trek is the Game of Thrones of science fiction or whatever
No,
the fuck you said earlier.
But let's get real. Let's get real micro with it.
All right, put jokes out of the room. Bring real talk back in.
You said we can't just say Star Trek and Star Wars. Give me a Star Trek episode. Give me a Star Wars movie, a Star Wars comic, like piece of like, single media. Not that's too broad.
Okay.
I like the one when the holodeck gets all fucked up and they're stuck in like
Fuck off.
Sherlock Holmes times. And Data's there.
That was the first one I thought, and I knew that wasn't correct too.
I like the one where they're stuck in Q does the Robin Hood times.
Okay. So I am honestly having, and this is killing me, I'm having a hard time thinking sci fantasy.
Well, what's the difference? What's specific? What's the difference between sci fantasy and sci fiction?
Technology in a fantasy setting or fantasy tropes in a sci-fi setting. So Star Wars is perfect because the Jedi use their mind powers and have this faith in this overall force in a space setting.
Whereas like Star Trek would be, and you can make some arguments for it being a little bit sci fantasy with like the Vulcans and some of the things that like people do. There's a little bit, but that's mostly sci-fi because it's all based on like the technology and whatnot.
And even the Vulcans do that through scientific methods with their mind. Like as much as you can say, it's a Vulcan mind ability as more so than being like the Force from Star Wars.
Well, no, I was gonna say because I before we did this, I was like trying to figure out like what all falls under the umbrella of science fantasy, and did like I literally went to Google and was like, "What is science fantasy?" And it gave me a whole list of movies and things. And the one that I hadn't even thought about it in this context, but I guess it makes sense, is the movie that came out this past year, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Without giving away like spoilerly things, because it's a movie that I genuinely think that like people need to experience. But it deals with like multiversal stuff. It deals with a lot of like alternative timelines and what if you make different choices in your life, but with like some light fantasy, I guess. I was like, it popped up as like being under that genre label, and I was like, sure, I'll say that. But otherwise, like I think Star Wars probably falls in like mine, and probably like down to like if for Richard's sake to name like a very specific movie thing, I would go down probably all the way down to like the original A New Hope, and largely because like again, entry point into most things sci-fi and fantasy.
Hold on, I'm Googling because I'm really bothered that I can't answer this question. Everything you said is correct.
Doctor Who.
I'm disappointed that you'd say things out loud.
That's what it is. Doctor Who. Science fantasy. Done.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
specifically in the part where it has all the fantasy and science.
as a huge nerd, I still can't come up with anything good besides Star Wars. Fucking a week ago, I could have told you 10 things.
Scientology. You can't get a better definition.
So
of
Battlefield
science
Earth?
fantasy. Yeah,
Wow.
Battlefield Earth is great. Yeah, Mad Max, I could argue. A lot of post-apoc stuff is technically science fantasy.
What?
Yep, so is steampunk.
No.
I will field no questions at this time.
All right, so
Steampunk stuff makes
Actually-
sense though as being science fantasy.
steampunk does actually make sense.
Most superhero comics are science fantasy.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't.
I mean,
I
that's
don't like
true.
the term.
No,
I think
it's
just-
a shitty term. It's too broad.
I think just science fiction is.
Nope, that's a different thing.
Superhero is superhero, and fuck yourself, Magnewski.
Well, it's all fantasy. People
The X-Men are
flying
science
around
fantasy.
in capes, and
Like having a higher salary is also fantasy, but that doesn't fall in the
Yeah,
trap.
but that's my point. Anything
What if
that's
you're a
fiction
scientist?
is fantasy.
No, what I'm saying is superheroes do not fall in science
As
fantasy.
a writer of fantasy, I'm going to say no, Richard. I'm going to say you're wrong.
Oh, fucking
Man.
Shadowrun.
Yeah.
Shadowrun is pure science fantasy. Richard,
But you asked a question outside of tabletop, though.
no, I didn't. I said, what's your favorite piece of media for science fantasy?
With my picks, I don't know if they're sci-fi or
Throw them
or-
out because
Just
you're already
say
doing better
them.
than me.
Yeah, we already fucked this whole goat entirely.
Well, Red Dwarf I mentioned already,
That's stupid.
but that's
It's all
more
the same.
science fiction than fantasy.
That's
Yeah.
more sci-fi.
Pitch Black, which it's got monsters.
Pitch Black is a great
So-
example.
So I'm gonna say fantasy, but I would say Alien is more horror than anything else.
Yeah. And Alien is definitely more like sci-fi than it is fantasy.
Yeah, it
But
is.
then, yeah, horror over top of all of it.
You know, so it's like
Yeah.
I don't do like terms of genre.
Oh god.
No, but like to me, I don't like sci fantasy. It's just science fiction.
Okay, so Richard likes Xenoblade Chronicles. That's his
Oh,
vote.
fuck off.
Right, so
Oh, I got a good science fiction.
doubt it.
Sci fantasy. Bioshock Infinite.
yes,
Yeah.
Bioshock. Bioshock is great. All right,
So
so
there.
edit this in.
We
My
did it,
favorite
folks.
my favorite sci-fi fantasy is Spelljammer, anything steampunk, and Bioshock.
Wait, anything steampunk?
Yes.
Like, what if it's like a really shitty steampunk, or like a steampunk Braun,
There's-
Axel Braun Triple X parody?
So what I will say is that bad steampunk beats bad sci-fi or bad fantasy any day.
I feel like that's an entirely different episode of a podcast where we could just scream and yell at each other for an hour about how that's wrong.
I mean, it's not my podcast. Let's do it. I got an hour.
I mean, I don't even know what a steampunk. Like, I know the aesthetic.
Like Wild Wild West.
Oh, that's pretty
Oh,
good.
If you're gonna ruin me, that's fine. But you don't have to go
That's
that hard.
steampunk.
You tell me that's not steampunk? I saw a big steam powered spider. It was pretty punk.
That's like
They shine a light through that guy's eye, and I saw
Yeah.
what you saw before he died.
You know what? I guess I do like steampunks. Thank you, Nate.
You're welcome, buddy.
what's something you love, Nate? Let me ruin it for you.
Okay, all right, for the guy that
Sure.
thinks it's silly, what should I watch, read, play to make me like, oh, steampunk is for me?
Wild Wild West.
I am drawing such a hard blank because he keeps shotgunning this horse shit directly into my head.
I don't know. You love it so much.
So I'll throw it out. Like it's.
Please help me.
I feel like
I'm drowning.
So I watched it and I enjoyed it. It was a movie adaptation of a book called Mortal Engines.
Mortal
Which
Engines
was-
was great.
That's the one with like the
Real-
big moving cities
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Faction
it's-
Cities.
Yeah.
The books were so fucking good.
I enjoyed the movie. I think it didn't do super well, like generally.
It did
But I
make
feel like
that.
I feel like
Yeah.
stuff like
Raz
steampunk
pretty
is always
bad.
hard because one, to do it right is really like it's a high budget item. I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen it in so long, but like the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock movies were actually steampunk movies.
Little bit, yeah. Like
Okay.
because they have the Victorian feel.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
that's
a-
an element of the steampunk is like that overly Victorian, but like
It's a
lots
time
of like
machine.
machinery and all of that.
Think Jules Verne, like 20,000
Yeah.
Leagues Under the Sea, Time Machine, all that fun stuff.
I've seen. All right, I've seen like two time machines, so that works.
A good older one, Van Helsing with Wolverine guy,
Fuck you.
Hugh Jackman. That's
You
steampunk,
just-
bud.
We said good examples. We were doing
movie
so
set
well.
That is. All right. How about, let's see here.
What's that Salma Hayek movie?
Wild Wild West.
Yeah.
Are we done here? Are we done, Phil? Is that it?
Frankenstein's kind of like steampunk.
Little bit.
Uh,
I feel like we're really losing steam here. No pun
Metropolis.
intended. I can see the list reflected in your glasses, Nate.
Fullmetal Alchemist.
Yeah, fuck off. You're looking at the same Wikipedia I am
Attack
over
on
here.
Titan.
I'm just saying, for a guy who says he loves steampunk so much, he has to go to Wikipedia to give me examples of things that are good.
He was ready to fight me to the death over Wild Wild West.
That's
Right.
Young Einstein. Army of Darkness.
Oh, wait, Army of Darkness. Oh, he has
Wild West is on the Wikipedia list of steampunk works.
I have really failed myself in a lot of ways tonight. None more than this.
And for the pot of blunders,
That's the stinger. Perfect. Let's do it.
before we get to go, not get to go, that's a weird way to put it. Before we're finally freed from this fucking audio prison, is there anything anyone wants to say?
I've been Conan Librarian.
Yeah. Yeah. We've all been made worse for it. And for the pot of blunders, eat shit going.
If you want to support the Pot of Blunders, please consider heading to our Patreon page, patreon.com/potofblunders, all one word. We've got membership levels ranging from $1 to $10 a month, which will get you access to things like our Discord, exclusive episodes of Jumping the Street Sharks, as well as a variety of other perks. You can also support the show and help us bring more attention to amazing indie authors by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate any help you can give. We love hearing from you. You can always find us on Twitter at Pot of Blunders, and you can also reach us via email at potofblunders@gmail.com. Want more reviews, interviews, actual plays? Head to potofblunders.com and learn about even more amazing indie games. Thanks for listening. For the Pot of Blunders, I'm Nate Magnuski, and as always, may all your Ds be 12s.